It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman. It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by Audible.com. You go to audibletrial.com/Opperman Report. You go there for free, you sign up for free, you get a free audiobook. Tonight we are live on TalkStreamLive.com, PSN Radio, Wolf Spirit Radio, TalkSuperstation.com, AwakeRadio.us, AwakeRadio.uk, Awake Radio Australia, 1800 Online, Shizaz Radio, Just Us Radio Network, and Scottish Sovereigns on the Land. Then throughout the week, will be replayed Saturday morning, again on Talk Superstation, Para X Radio, Saturday night, 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Penny Entertainment, blogtalkradio.com, Sunday mornings, 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Then Firehorse Radio, Wednesday night. Late Night in the Midlands on Tuesday, 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. High Point Radio, both on AM and FM, covering New Jersey, Bitter, New York, and Pennsylvania. FPRNradio.com. We're on 5 days a week. I think it's 10 a.m. Every day of the week over at FPRN Radio. I love you guys over there. And Cave Radio Broadcasting has. Tonight, I'm really excited. We have Bob Hamer, who is a retired FBI agent, and he's going to be telling us about all his adventures. And specifically, one of the things I'm most interested in is about how he infiltrated NAMBLA, because guys know how I am about these NAMBLA guys. They've been a thorn in my side for my whole life. Coming up, oh, by the way, tomorrow I'm doing a special broadcast, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, with this young woman named Victoria DiNatale. And she's an expert on bullying and cyberbullying and cyberstalking, and just this adorable young lady. I tell you, with this southern accent, I fell in love with her today talking to her. And we're going to be doing a show about that tomorrow, a little impromptu show at 5 p.m. Sunday, I hope to be doing a little impromptu show again around 5 o'clock that you can catch on Spreaker and iHeart and TuneIn. By the way, too, we're on TuneIn, by the way, now, too. About Bob Crane, the actor from Hogan's Heroes, and his whole life and his murder. The guy was murdered in his motel room. Really fascinating story with him. So we hope to be picking that up. We're doing that on Sunday. Okay. Okay. But tonight we have with us Bob Hamer. Bob, are you there?
Hey, I'm here, Ed. Thanks for having me on your show.
Thank you so much, my friend. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Well, I spent 4 years on active duty in the Marine Corps, and after I got out of the Marines, I spent 26 years in the FBI. So most of my adult career, I've been a government employee, and as my wife said, I never had a real job. So she keeps hoping that someday I'll get a real job, but I think it's too late for that now.
Okay, great. So now, why don't you give us a little bit of your background? I know you were in the Marines, right? And so what did you do? First, you went into the Marines, and you decided to get into the FBI?
Yeah, I actually enlisted in the Marine Corps in October of 1970. The Marines were actually, by that time, had been essentially pulling out of Vietnam. The recruiter had told me about an officer program that they had, so I went through their combined officer candidate school and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps. At the time, they needed lawyers, so they wanted to know if I wanted to go on to law school. So before I actually went on active duty, I went to law school, spent 3 years in law school, and then went through the Marine Corps Basic School, which was 6 months in Quantico, Virginia, and then Naval Justice School in Newport, Rhode Island for, I believe it was 3 months, and then spent my active duty time in the Marine Corps as a judge advocate. So I was really fortunate in that I had about 150 trials. I mean, there were a lot of guilty pleas in there, but I was in the court a lot. Those trials ranged anywhere from unauthorized absence to murder. So I got a lot of experience, a lot of courtroom experience, learned the federal rules of evidence, which is what they use in courts martials. But I think what the main thing was that the Marine Corps taught me how much I hated being a lawyer. I really had no desire to be in the courtroom. Everything, I kind of grew up in that Perry Mason generation, right, where you had the idea that, you know, everybody was innocent. At some point during the trial, the real guy came barging through the back door of the courtroom and saying, I did it. And I found out that everybody was guilty. It was just a matter of whether the government could prove its case. Every case there were never whodunits. It was always whether there was sufficient evidence, admissible evidence, whether the search was legal, the confession is admissible. And I just found it pretty boring, and was looking for something a little more exciting to do, and looked into the CIA and the FBI, and fortunately for me, the FBI came through with a job offer, and that's how I got started in the FBI.
And then where did they have you stationed first?
My first office was in San Diego, and I had finished up the Marine Corps at Camp Pendleton, which is in San Diego County. So at that time, you went back to the FBI assigned you to the office from which you applied. So I applied through the San Diego office, went back to San Diego. I was there for about a year and a half, and then was transferred to the LA office, spent 20-some years up there in LA, and then finished back in San Diego, which is where I retired out of the San Diego office.
So now, okay, you start off with the FBI. Now, what kind of stuff did you start off doing over there? Was it really undercover right away?
I'm sorry, what?
Was it undercover right away?
No, but I was really fortunate. At that time, San Diego only had 4 squads, and you had the one squad worked white-collar crimes, one squad worked organized crime, one squad worked the foreign counterintelligence, and then the other squad was a general criminal squad, and I was assigned to the general criminal squad. So very quickly I got involved in bank robberies and kidnappings and interstate transportation of stolen property. And So it was an exciting squad that I got a lot of work real quickly and was able to make some arrests, do all the aspects that most agents, don't have an opportunity to do so early in their career. But within about 6 months, we developed an informant, and we ended up with a case that developed. It was actually interstate transportation of stolen property, but it involved organized crime, and that was my first foray into undercover work. Again, I was fortunate because I'd been in the Bureau less than 6 months when I had my first undercover assignment, and now, for the most part, you've got to be an agent 2 or 3 years before you can even apply to get into the undercover program. So I started back before they kind of developed some new rules and regulations about undercover operations and who could go undercover. I think a lot of people have the misconception that everybody in the FBI works undercover, when in fact it's a very small percentage that are certified to do the undercover work.
Now what year around was all this going on?
I first joined the Bureau in 1979.
Okay, did you ever run into Ted Gunderson?
I know who he is. I never met him. He was in the Los Angeles office. I think he was there before I came in. I'm not even sure what year he retired from the FBI.
Yeah, I think it was like 82, 85 he left there. Because I'm doing a show about Ted Gunderson, too. I thought maybe you had some run-ins with him. It seems like either you love him or you hate him, So then this organized crime case, and that kind of, you made your bones with that and started doing undercover?
Yeah, my first undercover meeting, I came away with such an adrenaline high, and it was just, to me, it was so exciting, and I kind of found my niche in the FBI, and after I did that first meeting then developed into a very good case, and I had numerous undercover meetings with that particular case. It evolved into, we recovered over $1 million in stolen artwork, and what I did, and then I passed it off to another agent when I got transferred, but involved numerous indictments, and I had gotten my feet wet in undercover work, and that's what I sought that out the rest of my career. Now, I wasn't always undercover, but I probably spent about a third of my career in various undercover roles, so I sought out those undercover assignments. Now, some of those maybe only lasted a day or two, and others more than 3 years, so it just depended on what the assignment was. But like I said, I sought the undercover work. I loved it. It was a huge adrenaline rush, and it was the best way to put a case together, because it's a little difficult to deny the evidence when you've got audio and video evidence of the bad guys handing you whatever contraband you're trying to buy or discussing with you what they want to do. And fortunately, because of my training in the Marine Corps as an attorney, I understood the elements of the offense, and I could usually get the elements of the offense satisfied in those oral recordings that I was making. So it made for some pretty solid cases.
Kids must have loved you, because you had all that prep work done for them.
Yeah, I think a lot of those cases ended up pleading out just because we had overwhelming proof, particularly in the undercover. Now, I had a few cases that we had some issues with, but they always came down. It was more to procedural issues rather than factual issues. In all the undercover work, we always had the factual issues correct, but there were, like I said, some procedural issues that popped up.
Well, give us an idea. What kind of stuff would you do besides this? Okay, let's say these organized crime cases. You said the first one was some kind of stolen property.
Yeah, the very first case I did, we had identified a guy that was a residential burglar, and it was kind of interesting because he wouldn't, if you didn't have an alarm system, he wouldn't rob your house because they figured there was nothing important inside. But he worked for Joe Bonanno, who at that time was living out of Tucson, Arizona. Bonanno was a big organized crime figure that was originally out of New York. This guy worked for him. He did a lot of burglaries, high-end residences, and I eventually was introduced to him. We became friends. I bought some stolen artwork from him. I bought some stolen silverware, some clocks, and like I said, when we eventually took him down, we recovered over $1 million in stolen goods, some pretty high-end artwork and sterling silver, antique clocks. He had burgled one house and just had, I can't remember now, I mean, it's been a long time ago, but I mean, dozens and dozens of antique clocks that were worth an awful lot of money, and we were able to recover all of those as well as the artwork. So
now, how would you manage to get yourself introduced into there? You had a guy who was an informant, like a guy gets a case and then you talk him into flipping over?
Yeah, usually, obviously the easiest way is if you have an informant that's willing to introduce you, and oftentimes can remain with you throughout the undercover operation. And that way, if you stumble and make a mistake, I've got you, and you would just say, "Oh no, that's just Bob. He's my stupid cousin. Don't worry about him. I had to bring him along because my wife made me," something like that. So if I bungled, I was able to have someone that could kind of catch me and maintain my credibility with the bad guys. Sometimes, though, it was just a matter of me working my way into the group. In the particular case that I was just talking about, I had an informant that made the initial introduction to our target, and then the informant stepped out and stepped away from the whole operation, and then I ran with the bad guy, and we eventually brought the whole thing down. In some cases, good example, I spent 6 months undercover at Hollywood Park in Santa Anita, and we were targeting some race fixers, and the informant who identified the people that were fixing the thoroughbred races refused to introduce anybody. He thought the group was too dangerous, and so he pointed out who the bad guys were. So I started hanging out at the track, and eventually kind of, at least on the periphery, worked myself into the group with some members of the group, and eventually we took down 5 guys in that operation. But that would have been a heck of a lot easier if you had an informant that just brought you in. But it took me a while to work myself into the group, and I never really was accepted as an equal. But like I said, we were successful in getting 5 convictions on that. So sometimes the best ones, obviously, were if you were with a trusted informant that could introduce you and could vouch for you throughout the undercover operation. Sometimes it was a matter of just getting the introduction and you running with it, and sometimes it was just a matter of you breaking into the organization some way on your own, and then you were kind of out there on that high wire all by yourself without a net.
Now, especially with the organized crime guys, and wouldn't get around, and people would say, "Oh, I remember that guy. He busted so and so."
Yeah, obviously I was pretty cautious about who I did and where I did it. I didn't always just stay in the Southern California area when I was doing these operations. I went in different parts of the country. I think you're from New York, so you couldn't very easily work the same people in the same family and expect to get away with it, but right. You might be able to work, a family in New York and maybe in Atlantic City. You might be able to pull off those 2 type of operations. So you kind of had to be careful. The one thing, in most of my undercover operations, I wasn't the best buddy that hung out and socialized with these guys. I found it a little different. It wasn't that I just got with this group and hung out with them every day and went to lunch and went to dinner and went for drinks with them. It was more about they were a bad guy, I was a bad guy. We had something in common, and they weren't looking for a friend. They were looking for a criminal conspirator. And so it was for the most part, most of what I did was just a matter of you do the drug deal, you do the weapons deal. It was that kind of a thing. You might have dinner for a couple nights, but quite frankly, and maybe your experience was different on the East Coast, but on the West Coast, they weren't looking for friends. They were looking for somebody that could help them facilitate their crimes in some way. And I was a facilitator. I wasn't their best buddy.
Now, did you ever run across something like they would say, "Okay, buddy, let's see your driver's license. Let's see it," and they ran a little background check on you too? Yeah.
I mean that happened a lot, and it typically my response was, I obviously I had false identification. I had a driver's license. I had credit cards in my undercover names. So I had the backstopping that I could do that. But typically you just turned it around on them and said, "Sure, here's my driver's license. Let me see yours." And they weren't always willing to give up their identification to you, so they weren't pestering you for yours. There were several cases where I actually went months before they even told me their last name.
Yeah.
Provided me with any background. Now, obviously, I knew it as an FBI agent because of our intelligence reports and because of my case agent and because surveillance agents were providing me with the information they were getting. But it wasn't unusual to go several months and not know a guy's last name, depending on what the case was.
Okay, did they ever catch on to you and say, "Hey, man, we know you're FBI"?
It's kind of funny that I had some close calls. Usually, I used to laugh. On more than one occasion, it was after you made the arrest.
Yeah,
and it was always, "Gee, Ed, I knew you were a PI. You really screwed up when you said this.
Right.
But I went ahead and sold you drugs 3 more times after that." I mean, it was like, "Oh yeah, you suspected I was an FBI agent, but you continued to sell me drugs, or you continued to negotiate for the weapons. But you thought I screwed up because I had misspoken 3 months earlier." So, there were some times like that, but never to the point that it actually compromised the case. We were always able to get through. But I've had him, check me out, check my driver's license, and that type of thing.
Now, it says here that one time you posed as a contract killer.
Yeah, a couple times
Okay.
I had people that obviously that was a situation where I was introduced, and it was someone looking for a contract killer, and I was introduced to those people as somebody that was able to one was actually an attorney who hired me to kill his dad and one of his clients. And then I had another guy that ran a strip club in L.A., and he wanted me to kill his girlfriend and someone that he suspected of being an informant. So I had a third one too. So there were a couple different times I posed as a contract killer. I think my favorite one was the lawyer, because after I was introduced to him and I walked away, he told the informant that I had killer eyes. I was not quite sure what killer eyes were, but apparently I had them, and it must have been what my wife was attracted to me because of my killer eyes. But,
well, good thing you weren't wearing sunglasses that day, right?
Yeah.
We would have blew the whole.
Yeah, if I would have been playing that CSI Miami guy, He always wears his sunglasses.
That's right.
Have to take them off in order to sell myself as a contract killer.
Hey, now speaking of CSI Miami, you also did some consulting work and writing for TV shows and stuff?
Yeah, I did a little bit. I wish I could have done more because pay is pretty lucrative.
Okay.
But I wrote a script for a TV show called Sue Thomas FBI. I worked with Dave and Gary Johnson, and Brian Bird. They were great guys to work with, and that show went a couple years on the air. A funny story about that, there really is a Sue Thomas, and she was a lady that could read lips. She was a deaf lady, but she could read lips. And when I was I was the undercover agent in the LA Mafia family case. This was in the mid-'80s, and we eventually took out the top 15 mob guys in LA and essentially wiped out the family. I mean, there's still organized crime activity in LA, but not the family that there was with Pete Milano and his family that were the family in LA. And at one point we'd had a meeting, and Pete Milano had talked about the FBI. He had to be real careful of him because he had switched his desk around. His desk had faced out the window of his office, and he turned his desk around so that you couldn't see him you couldn't see him speaking through the window. And when I asked him why he did that, he said that the FBI had people that could read lips, and we all laughed, and we're going, holy crap! They give us more credit than we deserve. We have people that sit there and read lips and can say what these people are talking about. Well, lo and behold, this was in the early mid-'80s, and by the time it's about 2004, 2005, this TV show comes out, Sue Thomas FBI. Apparently, we really did have people that could read lips, and we laughed because it turned out the Mafia knew about it before we did in L.A., that they had that ability.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, don't these guys have, like, informants and guys working within law enforcement that tip them off about a lot of stuff?
Well, I think sometimes they do. I don't think it's as prevalent. At least I certainly didn't see it on the West Coast. I didn't think it was that prevalent. I think one of the problems we saw more on the West Coast, and again, although I've done some work on the East Coast, most of my work was on the West Coast. Most of the problems came more from law enforcement officers saying too much to the informants. I mean, obviously, and you know this as a private investigator, I mean, if you go out and you question somebody and start asking questions about Joe Bag of Donuts, then obviously you're interested in Joe Bag of Donuts, and the word gets back, and somebody might play that off as saying, hey, I know Bob Hamer works for the FBI, and they're looking at Joe Bag of Donuts. Well, so now it sounds like that Bob Hamer's corrupt and he's not. He's just asking questions, and I was probably didn't properly word my questioning to tip off this guy that this is the subject of our investigation. So we saw that more than the actual corruption of an agent.
Okay, gotcha. So we're here tonight with Bob Hamer. He's the author of The Last Undercover, The True Story of an FBI Agent's Dangerous Dance with Evil, Enemies Among Us, Targets Down, American Heroes on the Home Front, and Counterfeit Lies. And I have the link to all of those books on the Opperman Report blog. So you can go there and you can check out his books right away and see what's going on with that. I know you already sold a book from one of the links on my blog this week. I was keeping an eye on it. So we'll be right back after these messages with more of Bob Hamer, FBI undercover agent, and more with the Opperman Report after these messages. And now a word from our sponsors. We are listener-sponsored, and we appreciate your donations. If you like the show, please visit oppermanreport.com and click on the donate button, or you can donate directly through PayPal at oppermanreport@gmail.com. We have Mike Ray of infinityhomeplans.com. He's the host of Parlay over at CJ Mars Radio, Thursday evenings, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you need custom home designs, stock plans, or 3D work, he's your one-stop shop for home design and drafting needs. Mike Gray at infinityhomeplans.com. At infinityhomeplans.com. If you're looking for essential oils, stop by and check out Essentially Tammy on Facebook. She is Young Living Essential Oils Independent Distributor. Now, these are 100% therapeutic grade oils. They help support the body's natural functions. You can visit her website posted on Essentially Tammy to see the current deals, or email at JocoTammy, JocaTami @yahoo.com, or call 352-239-8546. 352-239-8546. Hey, if you need a private investigator, go to my website, emailrevealer.com. We offer asset searches, locates, skip tracing, adoption investigations, online infidelity investigations. We can recover deleted text messages from a cell phone or trace an email to online dating websites to catch people cheating. That's emailrevealer.com, or you can call 800-572-9762. 800-572-9762 for emailrevealer.com, my PI website. Pacific West Bamboo. It's your premier source for construction and craft-grade bamboo poles. They're announcing their latest project with EcoHead Event Sanitation, making bamboo composting bathrooms and porta-potties. Their first display will be at the Lucidity Festival in Santa Ynez, California, April 11th to the 13th. Come by and say hi and see what you can build with bamboo. Contact them for any kind of event planning, display building. If you need construction grade or craft grade bamboo products, call Amanda at 503-839-8126, 503-839-8126, or visit PacificWestBamboo.com, their brand new website. We're also sponsored by the New World Mexican Women. This is a rural Mexican craft women's cooperative. They are traditional makers of fine handcrafted, authentic jewelry. They use beautiful stone mosaics and Pacific blue Abilene inlay. They have a wonderful book of love letters written to their men in the United States, begging them to return to their families in Mexico. But they've written a new book, and it's it's about a young girl that falls in love with a rodeo bull rider and runs off with him without telling her family. It's a beautiful love story called Azucena Part 1, Azucena to the Rodeo. You can find their books and jewelry by clicking on their banner ad at oppermanreport.com or by Googling New World Mexican Women. You can also promote your business or website right here and have your ad played all over the world 7 days a week by emailing oppermanreport@gmail.com or calling 800-572-9762. And we are back with the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman, and the show is brought to you by audible.com/Opperman Report. Get yourself a free audiobook and sign up for free and help support the show. We're here tonight with Bob Hamer, The Last Undercover, the story of an FBI agent's dangerous dance with evil. Enemies among us, targets down, American heroes on the home front, counterfeit lies, and more. I just want to make a couple of quick announcements while we're here. One thing is that keep in mind that the Opperman Report archive section, the members section, just want to clarify once again that all the new shows that we're doing in the members section, that's additional shows. The archives of this show's free tonight. It'll be replayed throughout the week on all these different stations. It'll be available on iHeart. It'll be available on Spreaker. It'll be up on YouTube tonight in about an hour. So all that's still free, but the archive section is brand new content that we're doing, that we're recording for you, just for members only. So that's a new section. Check it out. The archive section on OppermanReport.com. But we're here tonight with ex-FBI agent Bob Hamer. You know, Bob, it's funny because you were mentioning about how you would bust these guys, and then they would say, "Oh yeah, we knew all along." You know, we knew you were a cop all along, right? I'll tell you, way back in the '80s, I was working for a PI in Brooklyn who was doing a bunch of organized crime cases, and one of the cases was the commission case in New York City, and we had all the FBI wiretaps. And our job was to listen to these wiretaps and then do our transcript and then argue with the FBI what their version of the transcript was. And I'll never forget this guy sitting in his car saying, "Look over there. See that van? That's the FBI. I know it's them. I'm getting out of here. I'll be back tomorrow in my I'll be in my BMW tomorrow." He knew he was being taped. And yet he would say when he was coming back the next day what time and what kind of car he was driving.
Yeah, no, I sometimes we give a lot of times we give these guys way too much credit. I remember one of the OC figures that we were looking at, a guy named Jimmy Coppola, who ended up getting killed in prison. But he was talking to somebody, and he said, "Jimmy, be careful, your phones are tapped." And so he started whispering. And it was just sometimes they would say and do some of the dumbest things, and or you know, they'd be in the middle of a conversation, and they'd say, "Hey, you know, be careful, your phone is tapped," and then they start talking about the baseball game, and they'd come back to the criminal discussion. So it was interesting. Hey, one thing I do want to clear up, just so I don't get in trouble with Ollie North.
Okay.
Those last two books you mentioned, American Heroes on the Home Front and Counterfeit Lies, I co-wrote those with Oliver North. So he's, as my wife says, he's the big font guy on the front cover, and I'm just a little font guy.
Yeah, I almost had a chance to. I was going to have a little photo op with Ollie North last week. He was here in town for this church group that I'm involved in, and unfortunately I couldn't make it over there. You know, but you know. So now, what was your experience with Ollie North?
He's a great guy and extremely bright. I mean, it's amazing how much he knows about so much that's going on in the world. It's fun just to talk to him, and I've been with him in sort of some small group settings as well. I mean, besides the one-on-one as we've worked through these books, but you don't want to interrupt. Just let him tell the stories, and it's fascinating, some of the things that he's seen, a side of this world that you and I haven't seen, and it's fun to discuss some of these issues with him.
Yeah, he has to be a pretty ambitious guy, you know, pretty aggressive to make it into the White House. You know, I mean, having an office in the White House is pretty impressive. Well,
yeah, that was a position that he was actually selected for, you know, while he was still in a Marine. He was actually a major in the Marine Corps when he was first selected for that position. So, you know, I've never specifically asked him. I'm sure he was given the opportunity to say yay or nay, but he may have been picked for that rather than he actually picked it. And I'm guessing if you talk to him, he's kind of sorry he did pick it. But it's worked out. What I find is that, you know, the guy is still out there. He's hustling. He goes and on these embedded missions with the military, and he's 71 years old. And
you know, really, I had no idea he was that old. How old are you?
I'm 65.
65. Yeah, I had no idea he was 71. He looks good for 71, I got to admit.
Yeah, no, he's in great shape. He works out every day, and he's in great shape.
But now, how did you hook up with him?
You know, it's kind of funny. My very first book, The Last Undercover, it started out, I had spent, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but I had infiltrated a group called NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association, and I never aspired to be a writer. It was never anything. I didn't take creative writing in high school or college. I never thought I would be a writer. But after that experience in NAMBLA, I wanted to expose the organization and talk about the boy lover agenda and what I had seen, and I wrote this book. I got an agent. We were looking for a publisher. It took us a while. Essentially, several publishers didn't want an entire book on pedophiles and wanted me to throw in some other undercover stories. So by the time I came back and threw in a dozen other undercover cases in which I was the undercover agent, we got a publisher. And it turned out that the editor that I had for Center Street Press, which was a division of Hachette Publishing, was Ollie North's editor on several of Ollie's first books. And it came down to, you have little blurbs on books where you have famous people say, oh boy, this is the greatest book I ever read, it changed my life. And the editor was asking me, he said, who do you know that's famous that could write a blurb for your book? And I said, well, shoot, everybody I know that's famous I put in prison, and I don't think they're going to be wanting to say anything nice about me. And I said, Ollie North, I was in the Marine Corps, he was a Marine, maybe he'd be interested in writing something about the book. So he sent the galleys to Ollie, and he read the book and really liked it and wrote a very nice blurb about the book, and that's kind of how it started. And then he started an imprint for the publishers Broadman and Holman, and it was called Fidelis. And he bought those first two novels that I wrote, Enemies Among Us and Targets Down, which are both novels. His imprint bought those two novels, and then they ended up abolishing the imprint, and I didn't have a publisher or an agent, and had 3 books published that did okay. I mean, they weren't bestsellers, but they'd won several awards, and they'd sold decently. Well, I started, when I retired from the FBI, and once I had my first book out, we lived in the San Diego area, and I used to go down and visit the wounded, the combat wounded, down at the Navy Hospital there. Most people refer to it as Balboa. It's the Naval Medical Center of San Diego. Started walking into the rooms and introducing myself as a former Marine, retired FBI agent, and instead of just saying thank you for your service and giving them a handshake, I would give them a book, and we'd sit around and talk, and sometimes I'd stay in a room for 2 minutes, and sometimes I'd stay there for 2 or 3 hours, and we'd swap FBI stories and Marine Corps stories and everything, and I developed a close relationship with a lot of these guys. And I admired the men for what they had done and for the sacrifices they had made, because I was meeting double and triple amputees. But what blew me away were the wives and the girlfriends and the families and the suffering that they had gone through. And I've been married for 41 years, and I take my marriage vows very seriously. But I mean, I met guys that had been married for 2 weeks, left on deployment, came back with no legs, and I'm not sure at 21 or 22 if my wife, after 2 weeks would have gone overseas and come back without legs, I would have said, oh, for better or for worse, yeah, honey, we'll stick together for the next 40 or 50 years. So I really admired these women, and a couple of them approached me about telling their stories, and so we decided to put some stories together and wrote up a book proposal, and eventually Ollie was looking for another book with his book contract, and so we got together and we co-wrote that book, American Heroes on the Home Front. So it's my proudest accomplishment, because I was so pleased that I could tell the stories of these guys that had given so much to this country.
So now, when you and Ollie are hanging out, do you ever get him to to tell you like secrets and stuff like that about Iran-Contra and that kind of stuff? Did he ever talk about it at all?
Yeah, he's talked about it. I mean, he's pretty open about it. His biography is called Under Fire, and he's pretty open about all of that Iran-Contra and the mistakes that he made, and what he did right, and his version of the story. And it's an excellent book that I would recommend anybody that wants to to learn a little bit more about Ollie North. I think what sold me on him, Ed, what really sold me on him is before I even met the guy, there was a book called Blues Bastards, and I can't think of the guy's name right now, but this kid was an enlisted man over in Vietnam, and he served in Ollie North's platoon. Ollie North was a platoon commander. He was a first lieutenant, I think, when he was wounded and eventually evacuated out of Vietnam, and he'd been awarded a Silver Star and 2 Bronze Stars and 2 Purple Hearts while he was in Vietnam. But while he was back home in Quantico, Virginia, teaching at the Marine Corps Basic School, the Officers Basic School, this guy had gotten in trouble over in Vietnam and had been charged with murdering a civilian, a Vietnamese civilian. And Ollie thought this was so out of character for this guy, and he took personal leave and went back to Vietnam, and he was told not to do it. He was told, this is going to ruin your career. And he took personal leave and went back to Vietnam and helped prove this Marine's innocence. And by that time, I'd been around so many Marine officers and so many FBI supervisors that wouldn't have your back. They wouldn't be willingly sacrifice their career to help you. And when I read that book, this was before I'd ever met him, or all I knew about him was, the pictures in Time magazine where he's standing there raising his hand before Congress. But I figured anybody that's willing to sacrifice his career like that, he's okay in my book.
Now, what were his actual convictions? What was he actually convicted of?
Well, they were all overturned.
Okay.
As I recall, you know what? I don't even want to speculate.
Okay.
I know that they were overturned on appeal.
Now, what about Giuliani? Had some Giuliani wrote a letter for you. How'd you come into contact with Giuliani?
Yeah, that was actually a pretty funny case, because it actually was part of the American Gangster movie with Denzel Washington.
Okay, go ahead.
It was that case, and we had a situation where one of their targets on the East Coast lived in Los Angeles, and I was able to do some. Well, actually, it's a funny story. I mean, I'll go ahead and tell you the story.
I had a funny story about that too, but go ahead.
Yeah, they wanted a picture of this particular guy because he was one of the conduits for the heroin that was being smuggled back on the East Coast to this organization. And he was an African American. I didn't have a good photo of him. I sat in front of his house trying to catch him as he left his house. I never could catch him. So one day I thought, oh, this is stupid. So I just went up and knocked on the guy's door, and his nephew came to the door, and I asked for him, and he said, oh, he's not here right now. And I said, well, look, I'm a private investigator out of Indiana. We have, it would appear as though your uncle stands to inherit $60,000, but I need to do some background checking and some clearing of him and determining if, in fact, he's the right person. I get paid by the court. I don't get paid by your uncle. So if your uncle turns out to be the guy, I'll be delivering a check for $60,000. So I said, could you have him call me? So he calls me. I said, well, I need a current photo of you so we can compare it to the deceased. He sends me a photo of himself, sends it to an undercover post office box that I've got, sends me that. A little later on, I get a call from our FBI office in New York saying that based on a wiretap, this guy is going to be traveling overseas. Could I help him out? So I called the guy up and told him that the judge was just about ready to issue an order and probably would come down in the next week or two. Are you going to be around? Because I'll need you to sign the paperwork. And he says, well, no, I'm actually going overseas. And I said, well, is there a chance, where will you be? And he said, well, let me send you my itinerary. So he sends me his flight information and the hotels where he's staying and everything, and DEA follows him the whole time he's over there and catches him meeting up with known heroin traffickers and everything. And then the guy finally comes back to the United States, and the indictment comes down, and we go out and arrest him. And so I get to go back to New York to testify about me posing sort of in your role as a private investigator working for an attorney. So.
And isn't that funny? If I would have pretended to be an FBI agent, I'd get in trouble. But you can pretend.
Yeah, you get in trouble.
You can do it there, right? All right, okay.
It's not a two-way street.
It's not at all, no. Well, you want to laugh because my ex-partner, Bobby Harris Sr., was the cop who arrested Nicky Barnes, which was part of that America Gang.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. He busted him. He pulled him over in the car, and he was offered a bribe, and he busted him for the bribe. Nicky Barnes, and that was I think it was the first case that Nicky Barnes had.
Wow.
No, but then Giuliani was involved in that Nicky Barnes stuff with the Georgia boys.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
I just know what I did, and I got a nice letter from him, and I had several letters from U.S. attorneys for work that I did.
Okay.
But Giuliani's the only one that ended up with a famous name. So.
Yeah, right. Yeah, he really took off. Okay. Oh boy. Okay, let's see here. What? No, out of all the stories, because I want to get into the whole NAMBLA thing, of course. But out of all these stories, what's your favorite one?
Oh golly, I think. I don't. Maybe the proudest case I have, besides NAMBLA, is at the same time I was working NAMBLA, I was targeting an Asian criminal syndicate, which started out as counterfeit cigarettes, and it eventually evolved into a $60 million shoulder-fire missile conspiracy. And,
oh, really?
I purchased $2 million of the super note. I don't know how many of your listeners are aware, but North Korea actually counterfeits our $100 bill, and it's called the super note. And it's a near perfect replica. In fact, one of the guys that we ended up convicting laundered nearly $1 million of the super note through the Las Vegas casino hotels. So how carefully they monitor counterfeit money. So he was able to launder about $1 million through the slot machines at the hotels, at the casinos. And it was a case that started out with one person, and by the time we got done, we had 34 indictments, and it just went all over the map. And I traveled all over the country for that case, and it's part of the reason why we have the new $100 bill. So that was a good case. When I worked the racetrack case, I laugh at this one because the guys that we were targeting, everybody had a nickname.
Yeah.
And so there was Jimmy the Mouth, Jimmy the Greek, Joe the Broom, David the Printer. Well, my nickname at the track was Bob the Cop.
Okay.
And it had turned out that this group had been together for 10, 15 years, doing different stuff at the track. And one of the guys had been gone for knee surgery. And while he was gone for several months, I was able to kind of work my way into the group. Like I said, I was never fully accepted into the group, but I worked my way enough that they knew who I was. They let me bet with them. They provided me inside information on some of the races and that type of thing. So when he came back, when this one guy came, kept asking, who's this guy? And he said, oh, that's Bobby. He works for a sports agent out of Boca Raton, Florida, and he scouts high school and college baseball players, trying to sign him up to his sports agency. And my son played professional baseball. I played college baseball, so I know enough about baseball that I could play that role as sort of a scout for a sports agency.
Right.
So he said, well, how do you know he's not a cop? And so it was always, this is Bob, the guy Renee thinks is a cop. And then it got shortened to Bob the Cop. So we'd had wiretaps up, and I'd get these phone calls from FBI agents. Hey, your cover's been blown. They know you're a cop. And I said, no, that's my nickname at the track, Bob the Cop. So,
it's funny though, because I wonder how many people realize how fixed those races really are. Because I remember back in New York City, you'd get a tip, who's going to win the horse, who's going to win the races tonight. And then by the end of the night, you'd kind of look around and see, well, all these guys, everybody got a bet down. The odds are going to be no good, But it's just amazing about how many, at least back in the 80s,
This was kind of interesting because, obviously Santa Anita and Hollywood Park are well-respected racetracks. Of course, Hollywood Park doesn't exist anymore, but Santa Anita is a well-respected racetrack. And there wasn't that much fixing going on. It was more at the smaller tracks where it was happening. But it wasn't so much that they could tell you who would win, but they could tell you who wouldn't win. And they usually tried to fix the races when they had pick six carryovers, and the pool was maybe $700,000-$800,000, and so they would try to pay off the jockeys that were riding the favorite horses. So the guys knew not to put their money on the favorites, and then they could spread it around to maybe a horse that was you handicapped to maybe come in second or third or fourth, and that would be the horse that would win because the guy on the favorite wasn't going to win. So,
but the only way,
and there was a lot of drugging of the horses,
right,
that we had determined, and eventually, because of the work we did, they changed their drugging policies, at least in California.
Now the drugging was to give them amphetamines, like that bute stuff, or
it was clenbuterol, which was it kind of opened up their sinuses so that they could breathe easier. I think that's the way it was explained to me. It sort of made it easier for them to breathe so they could get more oxygen so they could run faster.
But the only other way, so back in those days, they gave them the bute, and that would make them run faster. But the other thing was, the only other way to do it, though, was get the jockey to hold them back. Yeah. Well, that was, I saw that, too. Yeah. Now, isn't it funny, too, how all those jockeys, man, they got those gorgeous girlfriends? You ever notice that?
And a lot of them, they're tall and statuesque.
Yeah.
And these guys are 5'2", and they're running around with these beautiful models that were like 6 feet.
Yeah, they got these 5'10" models, every one of them. Like, what's the attraction? You got one, the guy rides a horse. But oh man, but that's how it is, I guess, right?
My time at the track, and I spent 6 months there. And I always said it could have been a 1-hour drama or a half-hour sitcom. Because there were just so many characters and so many stories, and that whole backside of the track is just a whole different world than what you see on the front side of the track, and the stories. And I laugh, and when you think about it, Ed, the track is the only place where millionaires go to minimum wage employees to seek investment advice.
So true.
No CEO is going to ask the janitor his opinion on a stock, but you've got millionaires that are asking grooms and hot walkers and everything their opinion of a horse. And I found that fascinating, that how very wealthy people would seek out essentially minimum wage employees for investment advice.
Yeah, that would be a great movie. Now, you hung out at the track every single day?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, yes, and that's a life, yeah. That's a movie in itself right there, or a book, All right, we're coming up to another break. This is a nice, big, long 5-minute break here. We're with Bob Hamer, author of The Last Undercover, The True Story of an FBI Agent's Dangerous Dance with Evil, Enemies Among Us, and then he also co-authored a couple of books with Oliver North. Heroes on the Home Front and Counterfeit Lies. Am I got that right?
Yeah, Counterfeit Lies and American Heroes on the Home Front is what I did with Oliver North. Targets Down, Enemies Among Us, and The Last Undercover are my 3 books.
So we'll be back right after these messages with more of Bob Hamer and his stories. We're going to get into the whole NAMBLA thing, about he went into undercover with NAMBLA. If you don't know who NAMBLA is, it's the North American Man-Boy Love Association, okay? And I had a couple little run-ins with them back in New York myself, back in the 80s and 70s and stuff like that. So we'll get into this whole thing back right after these messages, more with Bob Hamer. And now a word from our sponsors. We are listener-sponsored, and we appreciate your donations. If you like the show, please visit OppermanReport.com and click on the donate button, or you can donate directly through PayPal at OppermanReport@gmail.com. We have Mike Ray of InfinityHomePlans.com. He's the host of Parlay over at CJ Mars Radio, Thursday evenings, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you need custom home designs, stock plans, or 3D work, he's your one-stop shop for home design and drafting needs. Mike Gray at InfinityHomePlans.com. At InfinityHomePlans.com. If you're looking for essential oils, stop by and check out Essentially Tammy on Facebook. She is Young Living Essential Oils Independent Distributor. Now, these are 100% therapeutic grade oils. They help support the body's natural functions. You can visit her website posted on Essentially Tammy to see the current deals, or email at JockoTammy, JOCATAMI @yahoo.com, or call 352-239-8546. 352-239-8546. Hey, if you need a private investigator, go to my website, emailrevealer.com. We offer asset searches, locates, skip tracing, adoption investigations, online infidelity investigations. We can recover deleted text messages from a cell phone or trace an email to online dating websites to catch people cheating. That's emailrevealer.com, or you can call 800-572-9762. 800-572-9762 for emailrevealer.com, my PI website. Pacific West Bamboo. It's your premier source for construction and craft-grade bamboo poles. They're announcing their latest project with EcoHead Event Sanitation, making bamboo composting bathrooms and porta-potties. Their first display will be at the Lucidity Festival in Santa Ynez, California, April 11th to the 13th. Come by and say hi and see what you can build with bamboo. Contact them for any kind of event planning, display building. If you need construction grade or craft grade bamboo products, call Amanda at 503-839-8126, 503-839-8126, or visit PacificWestBamboo.com, their brand new website. We're also sponsored by the New World Mexican Women. This is a rural Mexican craft women's cooperative. They are traditional makers of fine handcrafted, authentic jewelry. They use beautiful stone mosaics and Pacific blue Abilene inlay. They have a wonderful book of love letters written to their men in the United States, begging them to return to their families in Mexico. But they've written a new book, and it's it's about a young girl that falls in love with a rodeo bull rider and runs off with him without telling her family. It's a beautiful love story called Azuquina Part 1, Azuquina to the Rodeo. You can find their books and jewelry by clicking on their banner ad at OppermanReport.com or by Googling New World Mexican Women. You can also promote your business or website right here and have your ad played all over the world 7 days a week back to the
by emailing OppermanReport@gmail.com or calling 800-572-9762.
Go to audibletrial.com/Opperman Report for free audiobook, and it helps support the show, so that we really appreciate when you do that. Don't forget, we have the new members section on OppermanReport.com. Got a whole bunch of big shows coming up on the members section. Up there right now is oh my God, it's the whole thing about why we had to quit Revolution Radio and the whole that whole thing. We have all the live audio on that. It's pretty funny from what I understand. I haven't listened to it yet. I'm going to do a little commentary. We're going to add it to it on that. We have David Schurter and his sister. They're going to be coming on. We're going to be doing a whole series of shows about Ted Gunderson that we're still working on. He's the former director of the FBI in L.A., a very controversial figure. With my old buddy, Reverend Ralph Knight from Gospel Tent Ministries up there in Maine. And we're going to be talking about how me and Ralph met and all my time I spent up there with the Gospel Tent Ministries. I'm going to be doing a show about mind control with Neil Sanders, who's an author. He's from, I think it's Ireland or the UK or something like that. We have him coming on soon. We're going to be recording with him on Thursday. We have Heidi Fleiss coming, the Hollywood Madam. Scott Thorson, he's going to be calling us up from prison. He's the former, I guess, victim, you might call him, of Liberace. And he was a lover of Michael Jackson. He was involved in the Wonderland murders. We have a recording up there with Dennis Hoff from the Bunny Ranch. Captain Crunch, the phone freak. John Draper. He lives here in Vegas now, so we kind of talk off the air quite a bit. And we're in touch with each other. We're going to be doing another show about the West Memphis 3 with Sean Wheeler's coming back. I got a couple other big shows about West Memphis 3 coming up that we can't talk about because when we talk about it, the guests start getting harassed by these characters around that case. We have some after-show content with Arnie Lermer. We have some after-show content with Toby Rogers from last couple of weeks ago. And we did another Paul is Dead show with Claire Kewen. We interviewed her for 2 hours, and she talked about her theory about how Paul is dead and stuff like that. We have Freeway Ricky Ross coming up. He's going to be coming on the after show. And we're doing a show this Sunday about Bob Crane, the murder of Bob Crane. I'm going to be doing a show tomorrow about cyber stalking and bullying with this fascinating young woman named Victoria DiNatale. Very, very charming young lady. And we have her coming on. But tonight we have Bob Hamer. And he's co-written a couple of books with Ollie North, American Heroes on the Home Front and Counterfeit Lies. He's also written his own book, The Last Undercover, the story of an FBI agent's dangerous dance with evil and enemies among us. So, Bob, can you tell us about the whole NAMBLA thing, okay? First, tell us who NAMBLA is and how you got involved in that.
The organization, as you said earlier, it's the North American Man-Boy Love Association. I got into it actually through another undercover case. The FBI had arrested a guy back in Tennessee who was in possession of child pornography, and it was photos that he had taken while he was in Thailand of children in sexually compromising positions and everything. So when they arrested him, they asked him how it was he got to Thailand, and he identified a travel agent out of Los Angeles who was putting together these trips for what they refer to themselves as boy lovers, or BLs.
Yeah.
So the FBI and the Justice Department had a meeting, and they tasked L.A. with targeting this travel agent that was putting together these trips to Thailand. And they needed an undercover agent, and I was in the Los Angeles area, so they asked me if I'd be willing to take a look at, to work undercover in this particular investigation targeting this travel agent. The one thing, I don't consider myself a nerd, but the one thing I enjoyed in school, even as early as junior high, were research papers. And I loved taking the topic and knowing more about the topic than the teacher did. And I can remember even in junior high doing research papers, term papers on the mob and organized crime and all that. And so in each of my undercover assignments, it was necessary for me to learn enough to be conversant in a particular topic. As we talked about earlier, I had gone to the racetrack, so I had to learn all about gambling and how guys held their programs and how they marked their programs and that type of thing. when I worked that art case that we talked about, my first undercover case, I had to learn all about Western art and antique clocks and all that. So I enjoyed the research building up to these particular cases. Now, I knew that in this particular case, targeting a travel agent that was putting together tours for boy lovers, that I was going to have to successfully convince this travel agent and maybe other boy lovers that I was one of them. So I began doing research on the boy lover agenda, doing as much study as I could on the internet. I actually went in, the FBI had identified these chat rooms where these guys would go on the computer and go in, and so I went in to a couple of these predicated chat rooms and posed as Bobby 13, and within a minute of going into these chat rooms, I had guys chatting with me, talking about masturbation and sex and everything else. I mean, it was pretty
what year
disgusting.
was that? What year?
This would have been 2001, 2002.
Okay.
So we had, so I thought that I had a pretty good handle on this whole boy lover agenda. During my research, I came across NAMBLA. I was familiar with the organization in the sense that I knew what it stood for and kind of knew what it was about, but had never investigated it. And I just assumed that everybody that would be taking these tours that would be a boy lover would probably be a member of the organization, and I thought it would be wise that I join the group so that I at least have that type of credential. Plus, I could learn a little bit more about the organization by being a part of the organization. And it was very simple to join. It was a matter of sending in $35, and next thing I knew, I get a letter, "Dear Robert, congratulations on your brave step of joining NAMBLA, and we're a liberation group to, what they stood for, and now I'm a member of NAMBLA." Ironically, the whole case against the travel agent fell apart. I thought we had a sufficient case that would have warranted prosecution by the U.S. Attorney's Office. They had a different opinion and didn't think we had enough evidence. I guess I misspoke myself. It wasn't 2002, it was 2001, because in the middle of all this, 9/11 happened. The Bureau wasn't going to let me travel overseas for this investigation because we were focusing a lot of our investigative efforts on terrorism. So essentially the only people that were traveling back then overseas were guys that were doing it as part of a terrorism investigation and not NAMBLA, or not child predators. So the whole thing fell apart, but I had joined NAMBLA, and I started getting emails from them talking about different programs that they had, the Pen Pal program, where they corresponded with other NAMBLA members that were in prison. They asked me to send Christmas cards to some of the members in prison, and I kept doing it. I continued to follow up on it. The squad that was investigating the travel agent, they were also interested in some of the NAMBLA members. Now, I want to make it clear, we weren't investigating the group, we were investigating the members in the group that we knew to have committed criminal acts. I think one of the prosecutors put it best, it's in essence, NAMBLA's barnyard defecation. We're not interested in the poop, we're interested in the flies surrounding it. So I began to correspond with these guys in prison, find out if they'd traveled overseas, how they traveled overseas.
Yeah, but Bob, because you're saying you could not investigate the group because it's a constitutionally allowed?
It's a First Amendment protected organization. In essence, what NAMBLA is saying, NAMBLA, by its charter, is seeking to abolish age of consent laws. That's what its charter is. So the organization isn't illegal per se. The organization isn't designed to teach you where to go to meet little boys or how to seduce little boys or to abolish age of consent laws. And I guess most of your listeners would understand that, but just to clarify it for somebody that might be confused, every state has an age of consent law, where at a certain age, below a certain age, you can't have sex with that person because they're deemed not to be able to consent. So it's called statutory rape. So in most states, it's 16 or 18 years of age. So if you're an adult and you have sex with a child below 16, even if that 15-year-old girl consents, or even if that 12-year-old boy consents, it is still statutory rape, and you go to prison for statutory rape. What NAMBLA is trying to do is abolish the age of consent laws so that as long as it's two consenting people, regardless of their age, it's not a crime. So that's on the surface, that's what the group is talking about.
Yeah, and one of their slogans is 8 is too late.
Yeah, there's another organization that's actually their slogan, but yeah, I mean that's sort of certainly members of NAMBLA believe that to be true as well.
Yeah. So
I got involved in the organization. I ended up. They were having their national conferences. I know you'd said you had been involved with them in the 80s. A lot had changed since then.
Okay.
They no longer had open meetings as they once did in the 80s and 90s. They were closed meetings. They only had meetings once a year. Only certain people were invited to these meetings. Thanks to the efforts of people like you earlier in the 80s and 90s, they did a lot to weaken the organization, but it still existed. I attempted to go to a meeting that they were having on the West Coast, their national meeting, and they told me that I couldn't go because I hadn't been a member long enough and I needed to be sponsored by another member. So I just figured, well, I had other work to do. I was working on the Joint Terrorism Task Force, so I had other things to do besides working this NAMBLA case. So but I continued to correspond. I wrote a couple articles for their magazine.
Wow.
By the second year, I received an invitation to come back to New York for their meeting. It was their 25th anniversary, and they were having this meeting, and I had kind of proven myself because I'd written for the magazine, and I corresponded with these guys in prison in the pen pal program and everything. So I went back to New York for that national meeting that they had in New York, and that was my first experience kind of in a face-to-face confrontation with these NAMBLA members, posing as one of them.
In New York City?
Yeah, we actually we met at Grand Central Station down at the food concourse. We met there. There were about 25 members, maybe 30 that first night. We kind of talked. I assumed, because I was a pretty savvy investigator, that I knew what a NAMBLA member looked like. I knew what a pervert looked like. They had stringy hair and wore a trench coat and hung out at public restrooms. But some of these guys in the NAMBLA meeting looked like Central Casting Send Me a Pervert, and some of them looked very normal. You wouldn't have picked them out of the lineup as being someone that was attracted to boys. And it turned out that I was accepted into the group. That first night we took a walk down to Times Square, and it was strange, Ed. It's kind of like going to to the high school homecoming football game. As you get closer and you get closer to the stadium, you can feel this sense of excitement. You can feel it. You can feel it building up. And we're walking in Times Square, and I could sense these guys getting excited, and I didn't quite understand. It was my first time at Times Square like that. And all of a sudden, we come to the Toys R Us, and we go inside, and several of these guys literally ran to the railing. to Times Square, but the Toys R Us there has a 60-foot indoor Ferris wheel. And these guys ran to the railing, and they're watching the kids go around in the Ferris wheel, and they are telling each other, within my earshot, of what they'd like to do to each of these boys as they come around. And it right then it kind of grabbed me, as I thought all the real perverts were in prison, that they'd already been caught. But I realized then that they hadn't been, and that these guys were walking around. And innocent parents had taken their kids on a Friday evening to Toys R Us to buy a toy and to go around on the Ferris wheel. And here were these perverts that were standing there, and they were being entertained by these boys that were going around in the Ferris wheel. Later on that night, we had dinner, and I began to develop relationships with several of the NAMBLA members. The next 2 days, they had general meetings in which they talked about the organization, and the meetings were pretty boring, but I did develop some communication relationships with some of the guys. One of them was an ordained minister out of Southern California, and of course I was from L.A., so we exchanged numbers, and eventually the meeting was over in New York, and I came back to the L.A. division, kept up with this ordained minister. Eventually, he provided me with 125 images of child pornography and 8 videos of child pornography. Then I went to a second meeting in Miami, Florida, where we ended up setting up a travel. One of the guys that I met there turned out to was actually a PhD psychologist, but it took us a while to identify him as that. He was also a flight attendant for American Airlines and used to use his mileage. He worked part-time for American Airlines and used his mileage to fly overseas to Thailand and to Mexico to have sex with little boys. He started talking about, let's go on a trip. We can go somewhere and meet up with boys, and we could all go, and just as a group we could go. So as the FBI, we didn't want this to get out of hand. We wanted to be able to control the situation, so I ended up telling them I knew of a place down in Mexico where we could go, and we set up this fake tour, and we had 8 members or 7 members of the group agree to go on this tour. And these were people from the inner circle of the group. These weren't just some guy that had sent in his $35. These guys were respected members of the group and kind of that inner circle. And we took out 8 members of the group's inner circle.
Because you set up a trip to Mexico where you offered them young boys, but then when they got to Mexico, they were arrested, or when they got to Mexico? How did that happen?
No, when we had a boat in Los Angeles and one in San Diego, and when they boarded the boat, the violation was travel and interstate commerce to have sex with a child. That's one of the federal statutes. So each of these guys had agreed. They agreed to travel to Mexico, told me the age of the child that they wanted and the type of sexual services that they wanted, and then they flew from all over the country to come to San Diego and Los Angeles. We actually set it up in 2 different cities, and they were arrested for the interstate travel.
So you never actually caught them doing anything here in the United States?
No.
Now, do you think they were just careful about that or do you think that they were also doing things here in the States too?
Oh, some of them were doing it here. I mean, one of the guys we convicted who got 31 years, he admitted to me that he had molested 60 to 70 boys here in the United States, and it had groomed about 200 boys. We didn't catch him doing it, but he admitted that to me in my undercover capacity of doing it. We had other guys admitted to doing things, but we didn't catch them doing it.
Right. Now, why don't you describe what grooming is?
Well, grooming is sort of, it's similar to courting. I mean, the same thing you would do to a girl, in terms of, you smile at her, you offer to buy her a drink, you tell her how cute she looks, and then you ask her out. So a lot of this, it was developing. There were a couple different types of pedophiles that I ran into. I mean, almost everybody had an age preference, and when you first met them and you kind of got beyond the hi, how are you, it's what's your age preference. And for the most part, you found that either these men liked prepubescent boys, or boys that were, getting ready to, the young teens. So you either found them where they wanted 8 to 10-year-olds, or they wanted 12 to 14-year-olds. Usually not one or the other. I mean, they were pretty specific about the age group that they wanted. So they would attempt to develop relationships. For the most part, they were grooming children as opposed to slam bam, thank you ma'am type of relationships. I mean, some of them did, especially the ones that went overseas. It was just a matter of paying for sex when they went overseas. But in the United States, it was more of the teacher, the coach, the neighbor, the relative who was trying to groom the child, seducing them by befriending them, by offering them opportunity to go on camping trips, by taking them to the movies, that type of thing. And we, in the United States, it tended to be more of that than actual just paying for sex. At least that was my experience in this NAMBLA organization.
Now, what about the families of these kids, though? They were just naive or involved?
Yeah, for the most part, and there were a few exceptions, but well over 95% of the cases of the victims, the boys that were victims, were from a single-parent home, okay, where there wasn't a strong father figure in the home. Most of the time, the men would target somebody where the child was looking for a father figure. And I think that's true both for boys and girls. Now, ironically, in the NAMBLA, and sometimes this is a little hard to wrap your head around, but they believed it was okay to have sex with boys, but not with girls. And they believed that boys were hunters by nature and girls were nesters. And so therefore boys were exploring their sexuality and girls weren't. So it was proper to have sex with little boys but not with little girls. So they viewed this as an opportunity to provide somewhat of a father figure to a boy that didn't have it. So they would target the mother as much as they would target the child. So they would make themselves indispensable. They would offer to babysit the children. They would offer to take the boy on a camping trip. They'd offer to take him to a ball game or to do things with him. Not necessarily immediate sexual gratification. Not like the first time you take the child to the ball game, you would do something sexual with them, but eventually to break down those barriers. That's the grooming process. That's the seducing process of breaking down the barriers and then somehow convincing the child that this is okay. Maybe showing them pornography or showing them pictures or telling them stories and just saying that this is normal and this is okay and this is our secret and we don't want to share this because no one quite understands this special friendship that we've developed. Those are the kind of things they would do in
Oh boy, it's just amazing because you say about how it's always the single parents, single mothers, and yet in family court, in custody cases, you're not allowed to produce statistics as evidence over which parent is better to have custody. And when you look into this, in every combination, women who remarry or women who date or women who don't date or men who remarry or men who don't date, the kids are always safer with the biological father, but it's not allowed in family court. I want to get into that kind of thing a little bit more with you after this break. We're going to take another little 4-minute break. I'm seeing from the chat room, people are really disturbed by this conversation and by this stuff, but we need to talk about these things and expose it. So we'll be right back with more with Bob Hamer. He's a retired FBI agent. He's done some writing for Hollywood and movies and TV series and stuff like that. He's written some books. The Last Undercover, The True Story of an FBI Agent's Dangerous Dance with Evil, Enemies Among Us, Targets Down. He's written some books with Ollie North, American Heroes on the Home Front and Counterfeit Lies. And we'll be right back after these messages with more of Bob Hamer, our guest tonight, about NAMBLA and how he went undercover with NAMBLA. And now a word from our sponsors. We are listener-sponsored, and we appreciate your donations. If you like the show, please visit OppermanReport.com and click on the donate button. Or you can donate directly through PayPal at OppermanReport@gmail.com. We have Mike Gray of InfinityHomeplans.com. He's the host of Parlay over at CJ Mars Radio, Thursday evenings, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you need custom home designs, stock plans, or 3D work, he's your one-stop shop for home design and drafting needs. Mike Gray at InfinityHomeplans.com. At InfinityHomeplans.com. If you're looking for essential oils, stop by and check out Essentially Tammy on Facebook. She is Young Living Essential Oils independent distributor. Now, these are 100% therapeutic grade oils. They help support the body's natural functions. You can visit her website posted on Essentially Tammy to see the current deals, or email at JockoTammy, JOCATAMI @yahoo.com, or call 352-239-8546. 352-239-8546. Hey, if you need a private investigator, go to my website, emailrevealer.com. We offer asset searches, locates, skip tracing, adoption investigations, online infidelity investigations. We can recover deleted text messages from a cell phone or trace an email to online dating websites to catch people cheating. That's emailrevealer.com, or you can call 800-572-9762. 800-572-9762 for emailrevealer.com, my PI website. Pacific West Bamboo. It's your premier source for construction and craft-grade bamboo poles. They're announcing their latest project with EcoHead Event Sanitation, making bamboo composting bathrooms and porta-potties. Their first display will be at the Lucidity Festival in Santa Ynez, California, April 11th to the 13th. Come by and say hi and see what you can build with bamboo. Contact them for any kind of event planning, display building. If you need construction-grade or craft-grade bamboo products, call Amanda at 503-839-8126, 503-839-8126, or visit PacificWestBamboo.com, their brand new website. We're also sponsored by the New World Mexican Women. This is a rural Mexican craft women's cooperative. They are traditional makers of fine handcrafted, authentic jewelry. They use beautiful stone mosaics and Pacific blue Abilene inlay. They have a wonderful book of love letters written to their men in the United States, begging them to return to their families in Mexico. But they've written a new book, and it's about a young girl that falls in love with a rodeo bull rider and runs off with him without telling her family. It's a beautiful love story called Azucena Part 1, Azucena to the Rodeo. You can find their books and jewelry by clicking on their banner ad at OppermanReport.com or by Googling New World Mexican Women. You can also promote your business or website right here and have your ad played all over the world 7 days a week by emailing OppermanReport@gmail.com or calling 800-572-9762. Welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. The show is brought to you by Audible.com. Go to audibletrial.com/Opperman Report and get yourself a free audiobook. We're here tonight with our guest, retired FBI agent, Bob Hamer, the author of The Last Undercover, The True Story of an FBI Agent's Dangerous Dance with Evil. I just want to remind everybody, too, that at 7 o'clock, in about 25 minutes, how we do this now is we drop Spreaker and iHeart, and, of course, we drop PSN and Talk Superstation. But we're going to, from what we're doing right now, from now on, is we drop Spreaker and iHeart and TuneIn, and we restart it. So and we do another hour, so you guys can go there and pick up the after show. There, but how we do it, we break it up so that it goes up on YouTube nice and easy for you. So it's a new little habit to get into on Friday nights. But we're here with Bob Hamer, retired FBI agent. Bob, we've had some other guests on here, like Mayor Jim Rothstein, who's a former NYPD detective who's done a lot of work in investigating these pedophile rings and these pedophile cases. And he was involved in the Franklin cover-up. We've had Nick Bryant, who wrote the book, The Franklin Scandal. Did you run across, with these NAMBLA characters, any that they had access to powerful, politically connected people or anything like that?
No, not what we saw. I think, well, no. I have to say no. There were some well-educated people that surprised me. I mean, it ran the gamut of the illiterate to Mensa members, PhD, college professors, airline pilots, as well as unemployed and the socially awkward. But I never ran into any big, powerful figures or claims that they had powerful figures. And I think that was one of the things that we kind of hinted upon the last half hour, is the group's purpose on paper is to abolish age of consent laws. In the 3 years that I was part of the organization, and obviously I wasn't there on a daily basis, this was more of a correspondence organization, except for a couple of meetings that I attended, and then once we started revving up this travel to Mexico, I was dealing with them on a more regular basis in terms of telephone calls and emails and everything. But they never once in the 3 years as I was part of the organization did they ever do anything to seek to abolish age of consent laws. I mean, there was never any organized effort to write your congressman, to write letters to the editor. They didn't like George Bush. They didn't like Ashcroft, the Attorney General, John Ashcroft. They didn't like him, and they didn't think that this was the time for us to be taking any overt steps to try to abolish age of consent laws. So there was nothing. I mean, it was not a political organization. As I found during the actual meetings, there was more of a legal discussion about the boy lover agenda, but it was during the breaks between the meetings where they talked about where they could go to meet little boys and how they could seduce little boys, about past conquests and everything.
Well, then I don't understand it. If you have that kind of evidence, just like, if you have a mafia social club, the Hunt and Fish Club, the Bergen County Hunt and Fish Club, and you can prove in court, well, listen, this is not a hunting and fishing club. This is a headquarters of organized crime. They can shut that down. Why can't they shut this down when you can prove that the only thing they're doing there is working on grooming little boys?
Well, I think maybe you could, but the prosecutors in this case weren't willing to try to do that, and I don't blame them. I mean, I think it probably would have raised more legal issues for appeal than what were raised in our case. I mean, the organization still exists, but we took out 8 members of the inner circle.
Yeah.
According to an affidavit that they filed against me in one of the cases, that they will no longer meet because they are fearful of infiltration. So, I mean, we made a dent with the organization. The organization per se isn't as strong as it was in the 80s and the 90s because of the issues of exposure and, quite frankly, because of the Internet. Before the Internet, you needed an organization like NAMBLA where not like-minded men could get together and talk freely about their desires to have sex with little boys and where they could go to have sex with little boys. Now you've got chat rooms, and you can get into a chat room. Now you may be talking to somebody from Henderson, Nevada, and someone in Indianapolis, and they can't really readily get together, but you can chat and agree to meet in Kansas if you want. You don't need to be part of an organization to do this, and you can. So I think that has lessened the value of a group like NAMBLA because you have the Internet and you can find these chat rooms where you can meet like-minded individuals.
Yeah, amazing. One thing I'd like to put out there, because you talked about the 70s and the 80s, is back in those days when NAMBLA would march in the Gay Pride Parade in New York City, they were cheered. They were cheered.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yeah. They were widely supported.
Well, I think you're beginning to see it coming around. I mean, there is a percentage of professional mental health care workers that are seeking to abolish pedophilia as a mental disease and disorder.
Yeah.
As you're familiar with the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disease and Disorders, the DSM, and as in prior to 70s or whenever it was, even homosexuality was listed as a mental disorder. Well, they abolished homosexuality as a mental disorder. Now there's a group of professionals that want to abolish pedophilia. There is kind of a sense in a certain part of society that maybe we should abolish age of consent laws. It's something that we see. I mean, to me, it's that slippery slope as we begin to justify different things. It can eventually lead to this. That slippery slope. That want to be able to say, look, if as long as they're consenting, they ought to be able to do it. Now, I will tell you, and this is disgusting, but I mean, I sat through a lecture where they justified having oral sex on 18-month-old babies because baby boys will touch themselves and it makes them feel good. And these men believed that by essentially committing oral copulation on these little boys, that they were bringing the boys pleasure. So I mean, that's the mentality here, and that's the slippery slope that we're looking at. That rather than changing the age of consent laws to lowering them. They want to abolish them completely. So they want to say that something like that with a toddler would be okay because you're not really hurting the toddler. In fact, you're bringing him joy because he would play with himself, so now you're playing with him, so you're really bringing him joy. The sickness of this whole movement.
Well, then let me ask you this, because you've given speeches in front of groups, I'm sure, promoting your book and stuff. I have as well. And every now and then you say something, and you look at the audience, and there's someone out there has their mouth open in a gasp. You know what I mean? How did you control yourself? They must have seen the reaction on your face when you hear something like that.
I truly believe that God has blessed me with a screwed up brain. I mean, I was able to compartmentalize. I mean, this was my most difficult case. Look, Ed, it's easy to be a contract killer, to pose as a contract killer. And when I'm a contract killer, you don't really care whether I'm a Republican or a Democrat, whether I like football or the ballet. You just want to know whether I'm capable of killing the person that you want me to kill. That's all you care about. In NAMBLA, I had to take on a whole new persona. I mean, I had to think like they did. I had to act like they did. A good example, one of the guys that we ended up convicting admitted that he had taped a Sylvan Learning commercial because he was in love with a little boy on the commercial. Now, you and I might watch that and think, boy, my son or my granddaughter needs help with her reading, and let me get the phone number off that. Well, they saw it through different eyes. A favorite movie of theirs was Lord of the Flies, not because it was some cinematography magic, but because it was little boys running around in their underwear. They saw life differently than what you and I saw it. And when I went in there, I had to see the world through their eyes, or I was going to end up, being exposed, and they were going to be able to detect it. So I had to be in character the whole time I was with them, and it wasn't easy. I mean, I wanted to kill them. I mean, I wanted to pull the pin on the grenade and blow us all up, and figure I'd do more for society by doing that.
What about any kind of like satanic ritual abuse with these guys? Any discussion of that, or any kind of
no? Never saw that. Never any discussion of that in my experience with these guys. Now, I have to admit there was some of that in the letters and the correspondence that I got with the members, but not in the meetings that I attended in New York or Miami, or in my correspondence with those guys that were out.
Well, what was in the letters?
I don't recall, but I mean, there was talk about, Satanism and satanic rituals.
And did you ever meet any of those guys in person?
No.
That's it. And no follow-up on that? No investigation on what was going on with those guys?
Well, these were guys that were in prison, and their mail was being read. Now, some of the people that were in prison, we used their correspondence to keep them in under civil statutes. Many states have statutes which, even though you've served your time, they can keep you committed if you're a sex offender and it doesn't appear as though that you've been rehabilitated. So we use some of the correspondence that we received to use in those hearings to keep people in prison longer than normal.
But even on a state level, right? I know the federal level, you get big convictions, you get long sentences. But the average sex offender in America, like, what kind of time do they do?
Well, these guys didn't do too much time.
Yeah.
I mean, one guy got 31 years, one guy got 14 years, and most of the others got 2 and 3 years. 2 and 3 years. So it wasn't much time at all.
And that's on a federal case.
Yeah, that's on a federal case.
Okay. Because the average time that these guys do is about 3.5 to 4 years on an 8-year sentence. So
the feds are to the point now that they actually have a prison where they try to keep most of them housed together. So, in fact, in it wasn't a federal sentence, but one of the guys that we convicted that got to 31 years, he had never even met another boy lover until he was in a court-ordered psychiatric or court-ordered counseling in a state prison with other he'd ever met. I mean, they had put them together as a result of their conviction. So, I mean, he was pleased to find a like-minded person.
So there can't be any benefit in that, you know. It would seem that they would make more connections and swap.
Not for society, no.
Yeah.
I see no benefit.
Well, then why do you think that's allowed?
Well, I think that there are mental health professionals that think that does help.
Oh, really?
It was interesting. You have to understand, and you do, because of this show and because of the people you've talked to. But I wasn't a defense counsel when I was dealing with these people. I wasn't a court-ordered psychiatrist. I was one of them. In their mind, I was one of them. So they told me things that they weren't going to tell their defense counsel or a court-ordered counselor. And a good example was the guy who got 31 years. He told me, he said, look, you just tell them when you go to court-ordered counseling, you tell them what they want to hear. We can't be changed. You know. Now, I'm not saying that's true about everybody, but at least this guy and most of the ones that I met, they weren't going to change their desires. Now, they may try to change their behavior, but they weren't going to change their desires. And they, for the most part, they readily admitted that.
Now, it seems also, too, that a lot of these guys, like the average adult male, you know, maybe you've had sex with, 20 women in your life, 30 women, 40 women, but these predators, these child predators, seem to have abused hundreds.
Yeah, no, and there are studies that back you up with that.
Now, why is there uncontrollable urges, so extreme?
Well, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I can't answer that. I just know that from the discussions that I participated in while a member of NAMBLA, they believe that what they are doing is proper. It's only illegal because society said it's illegal.
Yeah, I get emails like that. Long, detailed emails explaining to me how in history and the Romans and all that stuff like that. And it's throughout history, it's all okay, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just unbelievable to me. But the thing is, when you think to be someone in your position where these guys are full-time NAMBLA members and they're this has consumed their life. This is the center focus of their life. Is this activity. And it just boggles my mind these people can all find and have haven here, and then we can't shut it down. So, do you know of anything going on right now to stop this, or any efforts to?
No, I'm not aware of any, federal efforts. I mean, I know that the organization still exists.
Yeah.
It's extremely weak, but it's still out there. I think the greater concern for we as a society is not necessarily the organization per se, but it's the mentality of those people that think like them, the people that agree with the boy lover agenda, not necessarily the NAMBLA members,
right,
but those that agree and those that can find like-minded individuals through the internet and through these chat rooms.
Now, what about this false memory syndrome organization? Did this ever come up in any of these meetings with NAMBLA?
No, that was never discussed.
Oh, really? Okay. Because they seem to be really active in all this as well. And trying to say that the little kids who remember these these violations, or just fantasizing about it. Oh boy. Okay, we're getting toward the end of the show. What a depressing show, my friend. I love you.
It started out so jolly.
It's just so heartbreaking, that here we are in 2015 and we could just be putting up with this kind of stuff. It just and like you said, it's getting worse in so many.
I believe it is getting worse, and I think you need to talk to the victims before you decide you want to legalize this behavior. And it's the stories that I've heard. It's just sickening what has happened to the boys that have been victimized by these. And of course, like with anybody, regardless of which side of the aisle you're on, you can find stories of people that will condone this behavior and say it was the best thing that happened to them. But by far more of those that have been victimized by this type of sexual abuse and child abuse have been stigmatized and have had issues throughout their adult life as a result of something that happened to them as a child by one of these members.
So, what are you working on these days? What are you doing now?
Well, I still try as best I can to work with the combat wounded. I just attended the National Wheelchair Basketball Tournament that was down in Louisville, Kentucky. The team from the Marine Corps military was there and finished 11th in the nation in the wheelchair basketball. I'm also working on another book, but I'm not as busy as I should be, I think.
Okay, I guess we can all say that, right? Now, what's the new book about?
It's going to be a follow-up to The Counterfeit Lies. That's a novel, and so I'm working with Ollie on a follow-up with that, with another undercover story with Jake Cruz as the protagonist.
And what about speaking gigs and stuff like that? You do that?
Yeah, I still occasionally I do. I wish I could do a lot more, but I've spoken to political groups and men's groups and youth groups about my different undercover experiences and try to pull it into something that's important to that particular group. I talk to a lot of church groups, youth groups, that type of thing.
Now, what about? I know we were talking off the air about your friend who you just lost a friend to a brain tumor, but you have another friend right now who has a brain tumor and is struggling with that. Our audience does. We have a prayerful audience. We really do. Would you like to bring up your friend and have our audience pray for him?
I would. I believe in prayer. And
yeah.
I even talk about it in the last undercover a couple times where I had direct answers to prayer, and I believe in that. And my friend is named Brad. He's a staff sergeant in the Marine Corps. He has a beautiful wife and 3 young children. He was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer last February and given 6 months to live, and he is still hanging in there. He's in hospice care now, but I would just ask that your audience remember him in prayer, remember his family, just give them the strength as they work through this, to see a father that is fighting terminal cancer and the impact that this is having on the family.
Okay, yeah, definitely, guys. Everyone knows how much your prayers have helped me in my life and all my struggles. So I would ask you to pray for this guy, Brad, and his family and his medical condition there. So tonight we had with us Brad. Bob Hamer, former FBI agent. Now, Bob, are you a PI right now?
No, I'm not.
Never stooped that low, huh?
Okay. No, they said there was a written test, and I didn't want to take any more written tests.
You can hire somebody to take that away. Okay, the last undercover, the true story of an FBI agent's dangerous dance with evil, enemies among us, targets down, American heroes on the home front, and counterfeit lies. Bob Hamer, thank you so much for coming on. God bless you, brother.
Ed, thanks for having me. I certainly appreciate it.
Thank you, brother.
All the best with your program.
Thank you, brother. Okay, we'll talk to you soon. Oh boy. Okay, guys. Now here's the deal. We're gonna be drop in PSN and talk Superstation. I'm gonna be dropping. I'm gonna be dropping what do you call it? Spreaker and iHeart for a minute, and then resetting it up so that we can start over again with the Spreaker and iHeart and all of that. Okay, we're gonna take some phone calls after this, all different kind of topics, whatever you want to talk about. Okay, so we'll hit some buttons here. Let me see. What am I gonna do? I'm gonna hit this button over here. Play some ads over here. And hopefully we get some calls. 702-605-4894, or you can Skype me at ed.opperman.